commute. As a reminder, anytime I'm on the commute, it means I don't have the ability to reference anything that I might be talking about. So everything's coming from the old memory, so there could be mistakes. Also, this will mean that there's more opinion than necessarily the hard news I try and focus on most of the time. So just keep that in mind as we go on with today's live on the commute. I've got a nice long commute this morning, went through some intense rain back there, and now I got relatively clear skies ahead, so I'm feeling pretty comfortable. If I drop, I know why, because I don't want to be unsafe while doing this. So anyway, why am I jumping on? Well, I'm jumping on because every time I turn around, the situation with Donald Trump and Ukraine changes. Now, the back up a few steps here. Donald Trump has announced that he's going to start supplying Ukraine with weapons, and a $300 million aid package was announced. In addition, he also announced that he's going to start selling arms to European nations and NATO, who can then supply them or supply the arms that they have in stock and are going to replace with those to Ukraine. So this is good news for Ukraine because, excuse me, because they've been offering to buy weapons for quite some time, and Donald Trump has held off. To a certain extent, I think we can thank Melania Trump for that, because as Donald Trump has said, he actually said it just recently, that he'd go home and he'd go talk to his wife and say, "Hey, I just had this great conversation on the phone with Vladimir Putin," and she'd say, "Really, it was a good conversation?" Well, you do realize that Vladimir Putin just bombed another city in Ukraine, right? And this is this pattern over and over and over, as he would say, "Yeah, I had a great call with Putin," and she would say, "Putin just bombed some more cities again. He killed, a bunch of civilians and things like that." And it's pretty clear, at least from the context of what we're seeing, is that Donald Trump is actually getting briefings on what's really happening in Ukraine. Now, this seems to be a change from previously. Regardless of the reason why, he has now apparently decided to take on the full briefings, because there was a bombing of another children's, I believe it was a hospital. Could also have been a children's school, but I'm not remembering which one for sure right now. And a few hours later, he actually referenced that bombing in a press conference, which means he's now receiving current and accurate reports from the field on what's going on in Ukraine. And this appears to be a dramatic departure from previously, where if a reporter asked him about some specific event in Ukraine, he'd say, "Well, I'll have to look into that," or "I haven't heard about that," something like that. So there's been a dramatic shift in tone towards Ukraine and towards in just the started basically late last week. Now, a lot of people were just absolutely jumping up and down and saying, "Oh, Donald Trump has said that he's going to supply Tomahawk cruise missiles and JASM long-range bombs and missiles." Donald Trump did say that. In fact, he outright denied Tomahawks and JASMs. But, we're talking a lot of breathless reporting going on across the information sphere about what's been going on. Now, they've said things like the U.S. is going to provide Tomahawks, they're going to provide JASMs, they're going to provide long-range strike capabilities. One source even claimed that Donald Trump asked Volodymyr Zelensky whether, if they provided the weapons, they could strike Moscow. And Donald Trump also denied that. So the problem that I have in sorting this out is, how much can I trust what Donald Trump directly says? And that is a long-term issue. So Did he say that? Possibly. He did claim that he stopped Vladimir Putin to a certain extent by saying that if he back in like 2019, if he did anything, invaded or something like that, that Donald Trump would bomb Moscow. That's just it. Did he say that? Maybe. He might have. He's that type of exaggerator. But do I know for sure he did? No. The only person's word I have is Donald Trump's. Similarly, whenever there's a conversation between Putin and Trump, we have Trump saying one thing and Putin saying another, and the two accounts almost never match. But I can kind of talking about some general things around it. One of the things that Donald Trump has threatened is secondary sanctions against anybody who buys Russian oil, and he's put these additional sanctions with a 50-day, basically 50 days from yesterday, day before yesterday, before they take effect. And this will affect fuel delivery contracts that are being inked right now. So there is going to be some effect from just the threat of them. But the thing is that Donald Trump has changed how the tariff and sanctions things work so many times I'm not sure what to expect. But Russia's actually nervous. Now, they were, when Donald Trump started talking about having this big announcement about what was going on about Russia, the Russian market tumbled on the anticipation of some really bad news. But when Donald Trump announced this 50 days and additional sanctions, the Russian markets actually rose. I think it was 2,700 points, or maybe it went up to 2,700, one of the two numbers. But because it wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be. So, even so, there is real indications that Russia's nervous. Lavrov put out a statement saying basically that there was lots of agreement between Washington and the Kremlin, and that they should have some more talks, and they should have some more meetings, and they should do more things like this. And this is and that basically begging Donald Trump to come back to the table. That's what tells me that they're worried they pushed Donald Trump too far. And that's one of the things I've mentioned in the past, is that if Donald Trump decides that he's going all in on something and actually gets serious about it, that's bad news for Moscow. Or I should say, it could be bad news for Moscow. Because if Moscow successfully turns it back around. All right, looks like I'm reconnected. The Kremlin was actually quite successful at making this about Zelensky, saying Zelensky is the block to peace, that Zelensky is the problem. And yet, Zelensky was doing everything Donald Trump asked. He was being very careful about delivering that. But when Donald Trump said, when basically Donald Trump was saying that he was having good conversations with Putin, Zelensky was saying, you do realize that he's going to betray this, that he's going to not actually move forward here. And that's what resulted in that blow up in the White House a couple of months ago. Now, Trump is seeing that, in fact, he's been saying that Vladimir Putin will say one thing on a phone call, and that then he'll go around and bomb some more civilians immediately after. And that's kind of the dynamic we're seeing right now. Donald Trump is going to sell weapons to NATO. NATO will then either move their old stockpiles or these new weapons to Ukraine. And this will then outfit Ukraine. Now, understand that while there is the $300 million announced aid package, this is not, the rest of it is not an aid package for Ukraine. We're basically the store. We're going to sell you weapons. And this actually kind of matches how things went at the start of World War II, where the U.S. is like, look, we don't want our soldiers there, we don't want our equipment, our own personnel there, but we'll absolutely sell everybody any equipment they want. Then there was the Lend-Lease, that there was several other programs before the U.S. finally got directly involved. So that's where things are at right now. The U.S. is selling weapons to NATO. NATO is going to provide weapons to Ukraine, either from existing stockpiles or from these new weapons that they're buying. From the U.S. perspective, this is a business deal. And this does not signify a strategic shift except for the one thing, and that is that they have offered to buy these weapons repeatedly in the past, and Trump has said no. Now Trump has said yes, we'll sell the weapons. Secondary sanctions could actually affect countries like India, Brazil, big markets for Russian oil. Anything in the EU that are still pretty heavily drawing on or buying Russian oil. And that's the where this starts to get interesting. Secondary sanctions on China, India, Brazil, other major markets for Russian oil could really shake this whole situation up and really cause a significant drop in revenue for Vladimir Putin. That would be what would really finally end this war, is the collapse of the Russian economy and the inability for it to sustain actual wartime production efforts. But the thing is that there are additional factors here. China actually had one of their representatives say, we don't want Russia to lose in Ukraine. They didn't say they wanted Russia to win either. But it appears they want to support Russia enough to keep them in the fight. Now, why is that? Why would China want to do that? And the reason is simple. China believes as long as Russia is causing trouble in Ukraine, that the U.S.'s attention will be divided between them. So they won't be able to focus fully on China. Now, I contend that means that what needs to happen is we need to end the war in Ukraine decisively in Ukraine's favor, decisively knock Russia back. So that way, there is no way, that way China will also get the message that the U.S. is fully committed to freedom across the world and to stopping this type of aggressive expansion, which, of course, China is intent on doing. They've been doing it over near the Philippines. They've been running drills over near Taiwan. They want Taiwan. I'm surprised that they have not started demanding parts of Russia back, because it used to be part of China. But they've been very much aggressively expanding, or at least aggressively indicating their intention to expand to Taiwan and into the Philippines. And this, I think it was, they called it the 5-dash line or something like that, that basically takes other people's territory and steals it from them. They even tried to redraw the boundary with India. There's a lot of little things that they've been doing to try and expand Chinese territory. So by knocking Russia back, even though China's supporting Russia, that will send a message to China to knock it off as well, that there's actual peace through strength once again. The thing is that there is enough division in this world, including Spain. Spain actually sold a piece of heavy equipment that's suitable for making artillery barrels. That piece of equipment was sold to a company in Hong Kong that then turned around and sold it, in theory, to the Russians. Now, you can make the case that maybe Spain didn't know this. I would make the case that the odds that Spain didn't know where that piece of equipment was actually going as to be virtually nil. Not impossible, but low probability. That's because Spain has often aligned itself more in that direction. That said, I don't know for sure. That's speculation on my part. And as I always try and say, you'll know the difference between things I know are true and things that are just speculation. So I try and keep those two separated there. The overall result, though, is that Russia effectively has 50 more days to ever take as much stuff as they can in Ukraine. Now, it's not going well for Russia, I might add. They really have intensified their summer offensive, including the bombing. They had the bombing and drone strikes. They had an attack that actually included almost 800, I think it was 700 something, missiles and drones that was sent at Ukraine just about 3 days ago. So Russia is clearly intending to just beat Ukraine down as any way they can. Weirdly enough, Keith Kellogg, the U.S. envoy, showed up in Kyiv, I believe it was Monday. Yeah, I believe it was Monday. And then for the next couple of days, the intensity of the bombing slacked off, and there were no significant bombardments of Kyiv. So the joke going around right now is that they ought to give Kellogg a Ukrainian passport and have him stay a while, because apparently Russia's scared enough of the U.S. that they don't want to bomb Kellogg while he's there. It's a joke, obviously, but still pretty funny. Overall, though, the Ukrainians have managed to push the Russians back over in the Sumy region, and they're seeing a lot more activity in the Zaporizhia area. Russia has been intensifying attacks in several places, but conversely, Ukraine has also been working on counterattacks of their own, and in fact stopped several Russian assaults heavily. In fact, I got word that there was an entirely drone attack done, an all-drone attack that actually was done by the Ukrainians, where they captured Russian soldiers with an entirely drone attack with ground and aerial drones. So Ukraine is fighting back in every way they can. Thing is that, again, and I'm just going to finish off with this point here, the reports are that Russia has managed to rebuild their stockpile of missiles up to about 2,000. Which means that China has been providing enough equipment and supplies that Russia now has a supply chain to keep their missile production going. There's no indications that tanks or vehicles are having similar success, but the longer we let this little alliance continue, the harder it's going to be to finish this off tidily. Not that it can be done neatly at this point, but there's a lot of indications that the longer it goes, the more likely it is that it's going to require something much bigger to finally resolve this conflict. And that's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. I always appreciate it when you guys show up for the live on the commute. There's lots of more things going on. I wanted to do a full video on this, or a full live stream last night, but I didn't even get home until late. And I've got some stuff to talk about when I get the opportunity. So I'll be trying to put one of those together, depending on how things go, as soon as possible. But I wanted to say a few things this morning. So again, thank you. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.